Hello, Earth. How we all doing today? It's a pleasure speaking with you, humans. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Engelman, and this is the new AmericanMedia.com. This is a special show. Not our usual fare. It's going to be a little different today. Realize our commercials don't even work. That's how new this is. We don't have a batch of regular commercials all queued up. We could give you something that says, it's Friday and you know what that means. It's time for The Unhappy Hour on the new AmericanMedia.com. But in the absence of that, I just played you a song called Equinox by Elevated Tracks. We need to make sure we have a place where you can purchase that, because we love capitalism here. If you work hard, you should do well. We think, crazy us, thinking that success should go to those who work really hard and are very creative and brilliant. That's what we're talking about. What we're talking about today is a special show. We're talking about our planet as we know it. We're talking about everything it means to be an American and to be free, to have liberty, to taste freedom, to not be a slave, to not be scammed. We asked Mark Claire of Lions of Liberty the other day. We asked Mark Claire, why do you care about this stuff on like you put up on lionsofliberty.com? They just got named like one of the best libertarian websites. We encourage you to check it out. But he said, Mark answers that question, why do you care? He said, I really don't like being stolen from. Well, it's happening across the board. It's called inflation, and that's why gas is $50 for a gas tank and $200 for a few bags of groceries. But it's also happening to the Bill of Rights. And that's why we're going to connect with Dan. Dan Johnson. Good morning, Dan.
Good evening.
You are loud, buddy.
All right, let me drop that. Is that better?
That is a little better, yes. Nice to speak with you again, Dan.
Yes, of course. Good to speak with you.
This is a special edition of the Unhappy Hours, Agree to Disagree. Well, we kind of have two different shows. One is the Unhappy Hour for sports, another is Agree to Disagree, where we talk about everything else. And so I guess this is, I don't know. What do you think, Dan? Should this be Agree to Disagree, or should we rename today's show?
I think the Unhappy Hour can feature a little bit of politics that we're unhappy about.
Okay, well, here, we're unhappy about the National Defense Authorization Act. So Dan is the creator of P.A.N.D.A, People Against National Defense Act. Dan, why don't you introduce yourself, why you care about this, and what it is you do at P.A.N.D.A.
All right, I'm Dan Johnson, like you said, founder of People Against the National Defense Act. We're well over 20 chapters in 16 states. And I saw a video on the NDAA on YouTube not that long ago, probably about Thanksgiving or so, and it kind of made me angry. So I looked up what this was and found out that it was the Take Away All Your Rights bill, as you call it. And it definitely seems to, right now, to be the biggest thing that we need to take care of. So a little bit about me and my group. We started in late January, and we're now fully fledged. And not that long ago, I was honored to be asked to speak at the We the People convention in Columbus. Be about 1,000 to 10,000 people there.
Nice.
So looking forward to that, and I have some important news to share with you as well.
Well, let's get right into it. We have you for about a segment or so. Then we're going to be bringing in Ben Weinbrower of Existential.com. He's a radio host out of Chicago. We're going to talk about NATO, and we're going to talk about the police state that Chicago has become. But, Dan, let's get into it. Tell us about what interesting is going on in Pennsylvania. Set the scene, hit us with the bullet points, and tell us what we need to know.
As was described wonderfully by Belligerent Act, one of our good friends, in their tweet, Hero. Pennsylvania Constable Ed Quiggle Jr. plans to officially reject NDAA. The Pennsylvania Constable out of Sunbury, Pennsylvania, is planning to officially reject the NDAA and the Patriot Act in a resolution. It's going to be signed this Saturday. Trying to get as many people there as possible, so we want this to spread across the airwaves, spread across the internet. I talked to the ACLU about this. I've talked to Oath Keepers about it. Oath Keepers has already contacted their Pennsylvania chapter, and ACLU is going to write a post about it. And we want this to be a big event because for a few reasons. Number one, it's a constable. Not many people know that constables even exist in the United States. So it creates an interesting factor to it. And number two, this is the federal agency, or this is the state agency that the feds would go to if they were going to detain someone because he has jurisdiction over the entire state. So he's signing a resolution opposing both the NDAA and unprecedented both at the same time, NDAA and the Patriot Act. And he is also one of our Sunbury, Pennsylvania chapter head down there. And we're very excited for the things he's doing with this.
Okay, let's jump in right there because I instantly have a question. Why do you feel it is important that this gentleman, this constable, is going against both the NDAA that Barack Obama signed into law on New Year's Eve a few months ago and the Patriot Act that George W. Bush signed into law so many years ago after September 11th? Why do you think it's important that he's doing two things instead of just one?
It's important that he's doing two things because instead of just stopping the detention of Americans under his jurisdiction or making it more difficult, he's not only stopping that, but he's making it much more difficult for the federal government to spy on American citizens using his agency. And that's a very big step, is not only can they not detain these people in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, but they can no longer spy on them using his office's help. And this is a great step towards city council and a great step toward the state when they have the elected law enforcement, the state constable, signing a resolution opposing both of these bills. It sends a clear message to both the city and the state.
And it also keeps Democrats from saying, you just don't like my guy, and from Republicans from saying, well, you just don't like my guy. It's a lot bigger than Republican-Democrat, isn't it?
Correct. A lot bigger than Republicrat.
Republicrat. So let me just get back to constable again. Give me the clear understanding. I want to make sure I've understood everything I need to know today about a constable, because I know nothing about it. It sparks images, but I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Yeah, I didn't know what a constable was either until he contacted me not that long ago. And a constable.
You know what, Dan? I'm sorry. Unfortunately, a lot of people say that about like chlamydia and herpes. It just got me thinking. A lot of people, I didn't know anything about until my doctor contacted me. I think a lot of people are sitting around in the country just not paying attention to things until they get bad news. Like, oh, the stock market's down. Oh, the housing market's crashed. Oh, they're spying on you. Oh, they might pick you up off the street one day. And that's pretty bad news, too. But sorry, it just made us think about that. I digress. Please continue, Dan.
All right. Constable is a special type of law enforcement. He is elected by the people of a section of the city, and he's sent to law enforcement training just like a police officer would be, but he is a government official, and he has jurisdiction over the entire state. So even though his ward is a section of a city, his jurisdiction covers the entire state. He would be able to respond to a crime in the entire state. It'd be like a county sheriff, but the state sheriff, if you will.
So he's the leader of sheriffs, and he's locally the leader of his local area.
The leader of sheriffs, except he doesn't have any jurisdiction over sheriffs, so it's another level entirely.
Very interesting. And so tell me about the event. Let's paint the picture for it. Tell people where they show up, what day, how they get more information about this, what to expect, how they're supposed to tell their friends why they should care about this, because it's a lot of information, let alone so many people that are saying, well, the NDAA doesn't apply to me. So we'll get to that question second, but as far as all the details, what's the event going to be like and what do they need to know?
All right, he's going to be signing a resolution in Cameron Park, which is directly across the street from the courthouse in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, on Saturday, May 26, 2012, at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That will be videotaped and put on YouTube as soon as we can get it. But if you can be there, and if you are in Pennsylvania, or you know somebody who's in Pennsylvania that can make it, we'd like to have a big crowd there to support him. But that's the details right there. Again, I'll repeat. It is Saturday, May 26, 2012, at 10 a.m. in Cameron Park, directly across the street from the Northumberland County Courthouse in Sunbury, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Now, talk to the American citizen. I did this on our most recent show with Mark Clare, Lions of Liberty, and I kind of played John Q. Public. I gave him the goofy voice, but I won't do that this time. I'll just let me take another side. Let me let me be someone you're speaking with about the NDAA. Look, I don't have a lot of time. Tell me in one sentence, what is the NDAA and why is it bad? Just one sentence.
In one sentence,
yeah,
the NDAA authorizes the indefinite detention of American citizens without charge or trial, and authorizes that in a military prison.
Okay, let's continue this back and forth. I'd like to try asking one sentence questions followed by one sentence answers. Let's see how much ground we can travel here as if I were completely uninformed about it. Okay. That can't be true.
It has been coming together since 9/11, and you can look up the bill on Google yourself.
What is the bill called?
The National Defense Authorization Act 2012.
Why have people been pushing for this since 2011 or 2001?
As Congress has the example of never mistaking advantage of a good crisis, they've used September 11th to take away our liberties more and more.
But wasn't that just the evil Republicans?
If you look online at the roll call for this bill, the NDAA was supported by both Democrats and Republicans.
You mean the same people that haven't passed a budget for the country in 3 years agreed on this?
Yes, they agreed on this, and very bipartisan.
Then it must be a good thing for the country to keep us safe.
Do I really want the government, who is a all-knowing, all-powerful entity, to be able to decide what's best for me, or do I want myself to be able to decide what's best for me?
Well, I sure don't want the 1% doing it, because they sure seem to be screwing everything else up.
True, and if you look on who voted for it and what they were paid, you'll see that the 1% may have had a little bit to do with it.
So you're saying our elected officials are the 1%?
I am saying the elected officials are the 1%, because the 1% is not just wealth, it's who holds the power.
So who should hold the power?
The Constitution was designed and created for the government to be restrained by we the people.
Have we just been lazy?
We the people have gotten complacent with what we think is continuing freedom, while tyranny slowly creeps up from behind.
How bad is it?
This law is comparable to laws in China, Syria, and Bahrain, who we routinely criticize for their handling of protesters and political prisoners.
Well, it certainly won't apply to me. I'm not doing anything wrong.
You don't have to be doing anything wrong. Stalin, in his reign, picked up random citizens just to fill a quota to keep the populace in fear.
We don't do that in America.
If you look at the case of Ashton Lundaby, a high school sophomore in South Carolina who was detained under the Patriot Act, you'll see different.
So, who were you supporting in the 2012 election?
My organization is nonpartisan and does not support any candidates. Personally, I support Ron Paul because of his views on liberty, freedom, and the NDAA.
Those sound like the buzzwords other Ron Paul supporters usually inject into conversations, but what does that mean to me? I thought he was unelectable.
If you look somewhere beyond the mainstream media, which is losing viewers like the plague, you'll see that he is very electable.
Point to something where Ron Paul could actually be electable. Hasn't he lost everything and he's in last place?
Look at recently, his supporters just took Minnesota, and in fact, one of our chapter heads was a representative giving a speech in Minnesota.
Dan, I gotta tell you, it's taxing trying to talk in one-sentence bursts. Are you enjoying this? I'm having a great time.
It's definitely interesting.
Because you gotta be succinct. I got the idea. I was watching a Ustream video from Chicago with the NATO protests. And, you know, they have the mic check with the Occupy thing, and it's mic check, and then everybody repeats it so they can be megaphones without having to have a megaphone. The only way you can get your audience to react is if you use small words. Because then people try to get into these sentences, and the crowd just tails off like, I lost you there. So I kind of got the idea from that. But, Dan, I think what you're doing is something that we should all be doing, is paying a little bit more attention to something that you're very interested in. And if this NDAA, Indefinite Detention Act, where you can be picked up on suspicion, if this is the law, then we've passed a tipping point. We're beyond what we used to know as Americans, because if you don't have your legal rights, then this isn't America. And we appreciate what you're doing, but it's kind of overwhelming at the same time. What would you say to someone with those thoughts?
Although it's overwhelming, if you look at the vast network of patriots who are fighting, you'll notice that at least 75% of the veterans and law enforcement, since I'm not restricted to a one-sentence answer now, at least
yeah,
75%
go ahead, let it rip.
of the veterans and law enforcement are against the NDAA. In fact, 50 retired generals, admirals, and the like wrote a letter to Congress to back the Smith-Amash Amendment, which would have repealed the NDAA. So you're definitely not alone. And the biggest plague to patriots is believing that they are so alone they shouldn't take up the flag.
We are reaching that point at the end of segment 1 of 4. This is where I offer Dan the option to hang tight and continue our conversation as we bring in Ben from Chicago, or do you have somewhere to be, Dan?
I'm going to have to decline tonight. I'm fairly busy, but thank you very much for having me on your show. And for anyone who's listening, head to peopleagainstndaa.com for a detailed breakdown. We just released a NDAA slideshow or presentation that you can download and show to your congressman. It's been backed by constitutional lawyers and several coalitions, and I encourage you to definitely check that out.
Very good job on that last pitch, but tell them one more time about Saturday.
All right. This Saturday, Constable Ed Quiggle Jr. will be opposing officially the NDAA and the Patriot Act at 10 a.m. in Cameron Park, across from the courthouse in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. Definitely be there. This is a historic event. The two, as far as I know, have not been opposed at the same time by a public official in history.
That is beautiful. Make sure that you grab the video and that you reconnect with us. Get it over to Mark Claire, get it over to Ben, get it to us, send it to InfoWars and all these guys, and just kind of continue spreading this around, because we can't all be in Ohio and Pennsylvania, but as I'm getting ready to deputize Ben Weinbrower of existential.com to be our Illinois representative, we're asking you to be our Ohio and Pennsylvania representative for the New American Media. How does that sound for you, Dan?
So far, sounds pretty good. Obviously, keep me informed as time goes on.
Perfect. Keep your eye on everything, really. Thanks for your time, Dan. You take care.
You too as well.
All right. That was Dan Johnson of P.A.N.D.A, People Against National Defense Act. We are moving fast here, so we're going to call Ben. This is where if we had a producer, they would be handling this in the background. But we don't. But we'll gladly accept your donations so we can hire a producer.
Hey, what's up, Brian? How are you, man?
Living the dream, Ben. How are you, sir?
Doing well, brother. Doing pretty well, man.
Hey.
Just, winding down, obviously, a pretty eventful weekend.
Obviously. Did you have a chance to catch Dan's segment before this?
No, I haven't heard anything
Well,
just yet, man. I've actually I've had my nose in a couple of other news things here in the meantime, but yeah, fill me in, man.
well, he's just talking about some events going on in Pennsylvania where a constable, he said, I didn't know they existed either, but apparently he's going to become the first elected politician to publicly denounce the Patriot Act and the NDAA and say that they're not going to support or follow them as unconstitutional. So in Pennsylvania on Saturday, they have an event going on. So he'll tell you all about it. We'll post this later on the YouTube page. But what I told Dan of P.A.N.D.A, who's been a guest on your show as well,
Right.
I said, Dan, we would like to offer you the chance. We'd like to deputize you to be our eyes and ears for Ohio and Pennsylvania, please, for the New American Media. So I would like to ask you, Ben, would you consider being the eyes and ears and become deputized by the New American Media to kind of keep an eye on Illinois for us?
Oh, of course, man. Yeah, we're holding it down just like you on the West Coast there, man. We're doing the same thing here in the Midwest in Chicago, man, but absolutely.
Perfect. Well, it's been wacky over here. I don't know if you saw the case of the Fullerton police that beat a homeless man to death. I don't know if that one has crossed your wire yet.
Yeah, we saw that. The paranoid schizophrenic that was clearly a threat, right? No, I did see the footage and pretty disturbing stuff. The before and after was just something that was pretty chilling. But obviously we're seeing a manifestation of that same type of police culture here in Chicago this past weekend, particularly with the NATO protests. I'm sure you've been locked into a lot of the live streams that are on Twitter and in the cyber world, but similar stuff. You're seeing unprovoked violence from police, and certainly an intimidation factor that I certainly haven't seen in such an urban environment in my time. So it's pretty scary stuff. Yeah, the story you're referencing was something that I got to tell you, Brian, that one really disturbed me.
I got to tell you, Ben, I cried.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
I don't remember the last time I cried. It's been a while, but when you watch the police, this and if you guys don't know, this is a gentleman named Kelly Thomas out here in Fullerton, California, Southwest, and then this is why we're getting to this story real quick before we get into the other one, because we can't watch everything. There's too much going on. I mean, if you're in the Southeast, you've heard way too much of Trayvon Martin. If you're out here in the Southwest, you've heard way too much about Kelly Thomas. If you're in Chicago, you've heard way too much about NATO and protests and riots. And, each segment of our country has its own problems, but this is where a police officer stood over some guy sitting down on a curb who was obeying orders. He was let's face it, he was being a smart ass, and he's not really mentally right anyway, but this police officer gets frustrated. And he starts putting on latex gloves and says, "You see these fists?" And Kelly Thomas replies, "Yeah." He says, "They're getting ready to F you up." And they proceed to beat and kill him to death. And these are the police that we pay. Now, I've had John Oatkin and I've had Stuart Rhodes from Oath Keepers on here. And I just want to be clear. We support our police and military force, Ben, right? Like, let's make the distinction here between right and wrong. Can you address that issue for us?
Yeah, I think there's certainly, a feeling of, gratitude and respect to the law enforcement community at large. I think what you're seeing here is, a very unfortunate and hopefully isolated instance where you're seeing someone actually, lose their life as a result of this. Obviously you're hoping that's an isolated incident, but yeah, no question that there's respect towards the law enforcement community at large. I think it just gets a little lost in translation, and I think there's a lot of ways you can cut it up and analyze it. I mean, I would always argue when we get into this vein of conversation on our show is you have to think about compartmentalization and concepts like that, where a lot of these folks that are working, whether it be for a government agency or for local law enforcement, there's a militaristic attitude in terms of following orders, and you only need to know what you need to know to get your job done and nothing more. So in a lot of ways, you can. It doesn't certainly justify some of these extreme instances, but it tries to give you some understanding as to how some of these things can happen, even with people, well-intentioned, God-fearing people, which generally make up the law enforcement community for the most part. So, yeah, it's that's another angle to look at it. But certainly there's a respect there, and I think you're astute, Brian, to point that out, because you certainly don't want to come across as, complete belligerent, anti, military or anti-soldier, or anti-police officer type of mentality.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that Oath Keepers, what they really put out there is, look, we love you. We're begging you to remember your oath, and it's not to obey compartmentalized orders that are illegal, unconstitutional, or way beyond necessary force. I mean, it would not have been hard to throw handcuffs on this guy. That's the point.
Right.
Are you going to you're putting on latex gloves going, I'm going to make you bloody. Whether they intended
Right.
to actually kill or not, where do you think bloody leads? And it wasn't hard to
Right.
get handcuffs on this. Oh, he was on something. He was on drugs. There was, 6 of them by the end of it? I mean, come on. To throw 2 handcuffs on one stray hand and connect them together and then tighten it up when you get the chance, it's not that hard. But, yeah,
Right.
what Oath Keepers really puts out there is that, we need to remind everybody, you don't work for NATO. You don't work for the UN. You don't work for a politician. You work for a piece of paper that limited severely whoever we elected, because they knew how power corrupts. And we know most police aren't like in the Kelly Thomas death. We know they're not like all the bad ones that we've seen, but there are some of the bad ones out there. So let's kind of just swing it from our perspective here, because I astutely, as you said, thank you for the kind words, point that out, because we can't keep our eyes on everything. We got an important story here, and you have an important story in your backyard. Walk us through what it means to be in Chicago right now as a guy who feels similarly politically as we do here at the New American Media, that things are wrong in our country. Republicans and Democrats are perhaps both pulling a scam on us at the same time. It's about to hit the fan, and we better be prepared and kind of keep an eye out for things. And now you're living in the middle of a police state with NATO in town. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It's the best way to describe it, I guess, in a word, is that it's pretty surreal. And it really began several weeks ago when we first started seeing some remnants of military activity in the form of Black Hawk military helicopters that pretty routinely have been, whether it be flying over the metro area or along the coast, certainly in a very overt display of military presence, military capability. We've seen these copters for the last several weeks. We followed the news pretty closely, obviously, as it relates to some of the what's being called the red zone or militarized zone in the loop. A lot of this just being disclosed in the last couple of weeks. So there's been a lot of anticipation as to how this would all go. As I'm sure your listeners know, that originally was supposed to host the G8 conference as well the same weekend. Which, with that split, it did change things a little bit politically. But, we saw things that were, again, that were a precedent to what we're seeing this weekend, another of which was this eavesdropping law that we covered a lot on our show, which was basically making it illegal to videotape or take any photos of police, essentially doing their work. Pretty, absurd to think that could be signed into law, but that was certainly the case. So there was some, speculation as to how that would be applied, if at all, this weekend. As we've seen a lot of training footage and photography and various things that it doesn't seem to be an issue. But again, just some of this police state, as you put it, atmosphere that's been created leading up to this weekend. As it relates to what's going on this weekend, as I talked to you, Brian, earlier offline, just even something very communal area like the beach. This was on Saturday. Seeing a significant police presence. And, when I say police, I assume police. However, a lot of the police that I saw firsthand wasn't necessarily distinguished as police or military or National Guard. It was black riot gear head to toe. And, generally...
You mean like stormtroopers? Like, let's just say what it is. This is like stormtroopers out of Star Wars, right?
Right. I mean, it was a, no question the intent was to intimidate. There was just a culture being established there. So when, if you can imagine for a second, you have people, kind of chilling on the beach, you have families, kids running around having fun, people having food, picnicking. And at the same time, you literally have these, as you put them, stormtroopers literally just crawling the beach, just checking stuff out and kind of looking over shoulders and making sure everything was okay. So really kind of a surreal atmosphere. I haven't been real close to a lot of the major protests like what we saw on Michigan Avenue on Saturday, and then even today, from what I've seen online, there's been quite a few demonstrations down in the Loop area. But from what I can tell, and again, some of the images and some of the footage I've seen, the scope of these demonstrations are far greater than what you're seeing reported on, for instance, MSNBC's TNAM. We're talking thousands, I would even guess tens of thousands of people on the Michigan Avenue demonstration on Saturday. It was an incredible amount of people. Really, really blew my mind. And again, from mainstream media's coverage, it would appear that these are really being downplayed. So, that was another interesting aspect to this. But in terms of, the way you put it, police state, I think it's a great way to describe it. It's really been an eerie feeling to be around Chicago and, again, see this kind of weird, absurd military presence. And, it always had me asking the question, here's all these, all this military, all this quote-unquote security, but I don't think anyone feels any safer, So I guess that was the paradox.
Man, it's weird when you put it that way because I feel less safe than I've ever felt in my existence. With all of every one of these regulations make me feel like we're losing, and we've lost our freedom and our liberty, and the things that our forefathers fought for 7 years in the snow without shoes, with bloody feet. Like these people really knew what difficult was going up against the #1 NATO presence, the #1 UN military presence. It was the British Empire. Nobody stands up to them. Nobody stands up to Mike Tyson in his prime. Nobody wants to be against Randy Johnson in his prime. Nobody wants to be staring down Michael Jordan saying, I have to play defense in his prime. Nobody wants that. And that's what Americans did, and it just feels like we're so far removed from knowing what difficult is. Difficult is if our internet is loading our videos slowly. Think about that for a second. I don't want to say Americans have gotten lazy and, complacent, but let's face the facts. In decades past and centuries past, they knew what really difficult was. So I'll tell you what, let me do this. We have Blake Wally is out there connected with us. We're going to try to bring him in a second. We're going to kind of press pause for about 1 minute and 48 seconds, play a quick song, and we'll come back on the other side. Does that sound like a plan, Mr. Ben?
You got it, bud.
Okay, well, before we go, let's finish introducing people to you. Tell them about your radio show, what you're doing, how they can find out more about you if they like the angle that you're bringing and the perspective you're taking.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate it, Brian. Yeah, anyone can find us at www.existential.com. That's EXIS10TIAL. And we broadcast from the Windy City here every Friday night. We broadcast 8 p.m. Central Time. It's a little bit after you go off the air, Brian. And yeah, we like I said, you can find us and connect with us at that website. And yeah, of course, you can tweet us at Existential as well at the same handle.
Perfect. Well then, hey, we're gonna leave your line hot. We're gonna take a quick second here, and we'll be back in 1 minute and 41 seconds here on the NewAmericanMedia.com special Agree to Disagree or Unhappy Hour show. Whatever you want to call it is fine. We'll be right back. All right, we are back here on the newamericanmedia.com. We don't really have a name for today's show. The Unhappy Hour. Agree to disagree. I don't know, one or the other. We are hopefully still pleased to be joined with the pleasure and company of speaking with Ben Weinbrower. Ben, you still with us, sir?
Still here, Brian, of course, yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. We are going to try to bring in Blake Wally. He was our guest. I don't know if you got a chance to check out our most recent show, but he was the gentleman that got on video at the Nevada convention. The voter fraud attempt by some paid operative wearing a Ron Paul shirt passing out a fake delegate form with the same colors and half of the same correct names and then half of the fake names, trying to confuse people with who to put their support behind in delegates. But he runs a radio show as well. We're going to try to call him now. His name is Blake. Let's see how this goes. Oh, Blake, you're very quiet, sir. Yeah, you just came up a little bit. Let's keep going. Let's keep trying.
I've got the volume on the pedal to the floor here. That's as high as I can go.
Blake, how about you ask your question real quietly? Maybe we can try to connect with you after this. You did bring something up beforehand. I wanted you to connect with Ben.
Yeah, so why do you think they would pick Chicago out of all places? You would think, why don't, if they wanted to have, the NATO summit, and they wanted to kind of be quiet and not have a big protest and all that stuff, why not have it in Idaho? Why not go on a nice luxury cruise? They'll be out of the way. Why Chicago, the amount of money that they would spend and to terrorize everybody around for about evacuations and etc.
Yeah, no, I did hear the question, and Blake, pleasure to make your acquaintance, man. Keep fighting the good fight, brother. I did hear the question, and I think it was why choose Chicago? Why not somewhere more rural?
Right.
My initial response to that question, until he took it down the road of the rural piece. Number one, I mean, obviously with Rahm Emanuel running the city at this point, who's clearly a cohort of Obama, I think there's some level of control there. But I think the other element of it is, and it kind of goes into the same vein that we talked about on the beach with the riot gear head to toe. I think this is an opportunity to really beta test this kind of martial law mentality.
Oh, Lord. You think so? This is the dry run? This is the big rehearsal?
I think that's part of it. And I think the other part is just establishing a precedent, just getting in people's minds and thinking, hey, no big deal. Black Hawk helicopters, no big deal. Police and riot gear. What's wrong with this picture? Nothing. So I think part of it is just establish that culture as well. So I think there's a few reasons. Man, it's just my speculation, and obviously I don't have any inside knowledge or anything. But I guess that's my take on that question. It's a great question.
Blake, we have you still on here. You're very quiet, but we are being able to pick up what you're saying. So for anyone listening, they can turn up your portions and turn down ours, or vice versa when it gets posted online. Do you have any other questions? By the way, I wanted you to tell people where they can find your radio show as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but even if I did, I don't think anybody would hear me anyway. Right?
I can hear you, bud. So it's all good.
Thank you. All right, so no, I think that's what I think you're right on. I don't like to say that. I don't think any of us do. But why Chicago? Why that huge? The amount of money. Do you know the exact amount of money that Rahm Emanuel was authorized to spend? I heard it was just something outrageous.
Don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the figure, but you're very eloquent, Blake, because I actually had the same thought a couple of days ago, and I think I sent a tweet out something along the lines of I can't even really imagine what the opportunity costs are combined with the hard costs of literally closing down this city for the past 48 hours, which has been the case. There's been rolling street closures. There's been closures of the expressways. Clearly, there's been disruptions in flight patterns due to the militarized zone. Obviously, the cost of just security personnel, just the hard cost of that, let alone all the equipment riot gear, this weapon development, this sound cannon garbage we're hearing about. All of those things, you're absolutely right. It's a great question. I have no idea what the figure is, but I'm sure it's astronomical.
Well, I think you guys are both onto something, because if they're going to spend that kind of money, what was it? Department of Homeland Security just made a purchase of 450 million rounds of 9mm hollow point bullets.
40 cal.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 40 cal. My bad. Yeah, closer to my 45 than my 9. Yeah. So what are they getting all? God, you know.
Yeah, you can't use that stuff overseas because it's a violation of the Geneva Convention, and it's too expensive to use as practice rounds. So it has to be used domestically. So what are they planning on using it for? It's a 6-year war.
That is that raises so many concerns for me, because if you're going to put the money into this, you're beta testing it. There's a new cell phone commercial out. I forget who it's for. It's some dude from Saturday Night Live, and he's like, "Do you have a smartphone? Well, then you've been part of a beta test for the past 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel happy about that?" You know, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, they didn't roll out the real product until they had a chance to work out all the kinks. You know, kind of have your practice before you give your performance. And that really concerns me, because if they're stocking up on weapons domestically, if they're labeling people that, I don't know, want to follow the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that's so crazy a nut job, right? If we're being branded terrorists at this point, and the people in power are gearing up, I mean, are we really headed to a place? Are we really headed down that path? Is there anything we can do about it? I'll open it up to Blake first.
I don't. For obvious reasons, I don't even want to answer that, because I think I know what I want to answer, and it is very disturbing. But what else? Yeah. What else can you be? Yeah.
Well, phrase it a different way. What encouraging signs do you see? Let's veer it into a different direction then. What encouraging signs do you see that we're not going to end up like that?
Well, here's the deal. I think the big question is who is going to use it. If it's not going to be our military, and if it's not going to be our police, then are they going to arm? Is it either going to be foreign troops, or is it going to be the department, or is it going to be the TSA that's going to be armed? I think that's my concern, is that they're going to give all those weapons to TSA, and that's only 40 caliber handguns. We're not talking about how much ammunition they're going to buy for rifles and other kinds of weaponry.
Well, I'll tell you what, Blake, let's leave it at that for now, because your line is pretty quiet. We'll try to get some of those kinks worked out in the next few weeks here. We intend to bring you back on the program. Tell people where they can find you and your radio show. And once again, Blake is the well, you know what? 2 things, Blake. Number 1, explain to everyone, just in a sentence or 2, the video that you caught in Nevada, and then tell them how they can find out more about you online.
All right, the video, I busted a Romney supporter, a useful idiot of sorts. I was handing out fake ballots at the Nevada Republican Convention in Reno a couple of weeks ago, which can be found on YouTube, InfoWars, Prison Planet, and The Activist Post. Dirty Tricks Nevada will give me those keywords. And I can be found on Freedomizer Radio, or my podcast, and my website can be found, eccentricperspective.com. Thank you for the plug, Brian.
Excellent, Blake. Sure thing. Ben, would you like to say something to Blake on his way out until we next speak again, Blake?
Yeah, Blake, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, man. And like I said, keep fighting a good fight. And let's connect offline, and be great to have you on our show as well.
Yeah, great. It'd be great to link up with you guys. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show again, Brian. Keep up the great work, guys, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Hopefully I'll get my technical kinks worked out next time. But you guys take care. Have a good one. Hey,
thanks a lot, Blake. Yeah, and we've said before, a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. If our freedom and liberty disappear next week, what did I do today? So that was Blake joining us. I definitely wanted to connect you with them, Ben, because what I've been saying is this. I think it's time for all of the strings who feel in a similar way passionate. I don't know if it's love or duty, honor, privilege. Feel strongly in one of those areas about the country of the United States of America, the Republic, not a democracy, the Republic of the United States of America. And I think it's time for all of the strings to start being woven together into a tight-knit fabric. And, you guys are doing things over there. Tell us what fuels you. Why do you do this? Because we got to start connecting and make this more tangible. We need to spend a little bit more time connecting one person by one person, not 100,000 fake friends, one actual friend. Right. And somebody, he's got an eye on Nevada. I talked to Dan from P.A.N.D.A. He's looking at Ohio and Pennsylvania. I got you looking at Illinois. We're looking at Chicago, at California here. So, I don't know, just go from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think probably, we always say kind of when you woke up, so to speak. I think probably a lot of the same things that got you, that along these lines of thinking, got me the same way. But I think what got us, obviously, certainly, Brian, what you guys are doing with New American Media was something that was inspirational for us to start doing the podcast, start doing the radio show for sure. But just in terms of the mode of thought, I guess it's more pointing out so much absurdity, because I think there's so many of, particularly my generation, when I kind of look around and see, most of the sources of information people are using, primarily where they're consuming news and things like that. Most people have become, I hate to say it, but just so brain dead, just kind of, walking through and just going through the motions, just kind of being spoon fed a lot of this real, in many cases, disinformation or propaganda, and taking it as gospel. So I think a lot of it was pointing out that absurdity, and getting people to maybe take some different angles and some different perspective on a lot of what they're seeing as news, because there's a lot of precedent to this, and we've talked in past shows, we've connected on your show, as well as we talked on my show a little bit about, things like the Oklahoma City bombing, or, things like the Gulf of Tonkin, certainly 9/11, just a lot of, a lot of instances that people should, really second guess their blind faith for the government. And I think that's kind of been what's, gotten us to take the steps, is actually getting on the airwaves and talking about it. And just to, as we always kind of use that, we've, kind of propagated that hashtag of wake up, just trying to wake people up, think about things a little bit differently, and challenge what you're being spoon-fed, because no one else is going to do it for you. So I think, to your question to Blake earlier about what's encouraging, the fact that we're on the airwaves right now is pretty encouraging, right? The fact that we're talking about these things.
By the way, let me jump in there. It's pretty encouraging that you have the mental chops to go back and do a retroactive 7-minute-old segue to put us back on point. Good job, Ben. I mean that. That was good, because I intended to ask you, and I veered off on another road, and you just built a connector road and brought me back over to where we were going. So good. Thank you, and continue.
Like we've always said, great minds kind of think alike. I think we said that a little tongue-in-cheek, but but no, I mean, in all truth, I think we are like-minded in a lot of issues. I think it's, there's some chemistry there in terms of bringing things full circle. But your question to Blake was, what are some of the encouraging signs? And I mentioned, simply the fact that we're on the airwaves is certainly an encouraging sign. But I see more and more people becoming more and more vocal about their, mistrust or just skepticism towards mainstream media. And I think in the past it's been a little bit taboo, a little bit of a faux pas to say things like, I think Barack Obama might not be a legitimate presidential candidate, and that maybe his provenance is in question. Whereas in the past maybe that was such a sensational thing to say, people might second guess themselves. Whereas now I think more and more people are finding a comfort level to really challenge, what's being accepted as gospel, like I said. So I think that's a really encouraging sign, because, it's just those seeds are planted, and I think we're seeing it manifest itself in a lot of these upstart candidates. And you've mentioned a few on your show, libertarian-minded individuals who are getting involved at the municipal and local level government, and that's a really encouraging thing to see too.
And the other direction that I took that initial question before we took it into the positive place, where Blake said, I really don't, I don't know how to answer. Like, I don't want to, I'm not playing gotcha. I'm not playing gotcha politics. Right. I'm not doing that. But are things as bad? Are things really as bad as a lot of us think? Because people are just we've been called crazy for so long. It's almost like, what was the Hitler line? If you tell a small lie, nobody will believe it. But if you want people to believe you, tell the biggest lie you can think of. I'm obviously paraphrasing. Yeah. Not that we need to give Hitler his due respect, because I don't know, whatever. But things are really this bad. Talk to John Q. Public for just a second. Why are things worse than they realize, and bad enough for you and I to waste tons of our time trying to oppose it?
Well, they're bad enough for you and I to spend time doing what we do, because I think we see, think of just the word trajectory. There's probably some golfers out there. You watch that ball off the tee, you got a pretty good idea where it's going to end up. Well, we're off the tee. We're people like ourselves and a lot of other people, and not only the alternative media, but in some cases the mainstream media. We see a trajectory, and it's not a difficult thing to kind of sort through that and try to analyze that and understand it. So I'm certainly not advocating the position that the world, like the sky's falling, things are going down tomorrow. I try to take more of a hedged view. Things, I think, are moving in a bad direction, but I think that there is an opportunity for more and more young people to get involved in politics, start to educate yourself a little bit. The other issues that we talk about a lot are economic issues, and you think about those types of issues, these education issues that exist in our country. No one's being taught as young people, hey man, here's how you open a business, or here's how to think in an entrepreneurial way. Everybody's simply trained, whether it's, here, figure out how to be an electrician or pipe fitter, and even that's kind of dying a little bit, or it's, hey, go to school and get a degree in let's say it's education or communications, put yourself in hopeless debt to do what? To have a 50% shot at getting a job working for someone else. We're taking a really weird angle from an economic standpoint. So I challenge that mode of thought too. So, it's a lot of things. But is the sky falling tomorrow? I don't think so. But I think there is opportunity for us to take it back. But it's got to start at the grassroots level, and I think that's kind of why we do what we do. We've said in past shows as well, there's ways that you can simply do simple things, easy things, and thoughtful things that can help you sleep a little better at night and hedge yourself if things do get much, much worse.
What three things should people do right now to just have a little bit more peace of mind? Quickly, just what three one-sentence things? If you do this, if you do this, if you do this, you're going to be able to sleep better. And maybe even what reason? Why should they consider those three things?
From an investment standpoint, you hear it all the time, but I take a hard look at gold and silver, take a hard look at those things. And I'm talking about physical metal. I think they're smart to look at. They're basically a hedge against inflation. I won't sit here and explain why, because we could do that for hours, but read about it, Google it.
It's easy to explain. You just say you can't go to a photocopy machine and Xerox a gold coin like you can a dollar. And it's not as easy to add a zero by pressing zero on your computer than to put a gold coin in somebody's hands. It takes time and energy to harvest that from the ground and refine it and mint it and distribute it and pass it along. It's harder to fake, I think, is the easy answer.
Absolutely.
There. Okay, so what's the second thing they can do?
And this is just, a personal opinion of mine, but I think it's a good idea just because, I've seen it work. I've seen this mentality and this type of culture work, but that's educate yourself as it relates to your Second Amendment and how to safely handle firearms and understand firearms. I'm not saying go out and buy a gun or go out and start an arsenal. Understand those types of things, because those are just basic ways that you can protect yourself in a very difficult situation if that should, and God forbid, come to pass. So understand that right. Protect that right, because in a lot of ways that right's under attack, and I think where I live here in Chicago is one of the best examples of that in the country. So understand that right and familiarize yourself and become comfortable and develop a safety level with firearms. I think that's a smart thing to do. I think it's an easy thing for people to do in terms of exposing yourself to that. I think and again, that's me personally. A lot of people don't think that firearms are necessarily something they want to get involved in, but for me, I think it's a good idea.
Well, I'll tell you what, if somebody wants to tell me that they'd rather not have the ability to protect themselves, I'll remind them that when 3 loose pit bulls were killing things in my front yard, ripping the throats out of my elderly neighbor's dog's throat, and it took the animal control and police an hour and 45 minutes to come here in in Los Angeles, California. I'll tell you what, if you choose to not arm yourself, good for you. You can take as many risks as you want. It's like if you want to have unprotected sex, what do I care as long as we're not on universal health insurance? If your loss doesn't mean my paycheck, then what do I care? That's a libertarian stance. And obviously it's like, hey, try not to be dumb and contract a disease or get bit or shot or something. But I'll just remind people, if they choose to not worry about the person that got shot in our neighborhood and the 13 cop cars that came by, being able to defend yourself, or the car that was stolen in our neighborhood, where what if that was your significant other parking the car and there was a carjacking? I mean, if you choose to not defend yourself, that's your choice. I don't recommend that. I recommend that you become as self-reliant as possible. But I will go so far as to recommend that people take a strong look at why was the second thing our founding fathers said you need to have protection. Why should we be able to protect and defend ourselves? And I know a lot of people that have frankly been very emotional, had a very difficult time holding a gun and firing a gun and loading a gun and just didn't like the concept. And then a couple times at the shooting range, they're having a blast, literally and figuratively, doing some sport shooting, just the comfort level of knowing, oh, this is how I protect myself in a worst-case situation. I don't use it like Homer Simpson to open up a can of beans or something, or to change the channel on the television like you did in the Homer versus the NRA episode. But yeah, I will go so far as to recommend that, our founding fathers said, hey, you can say whatever you want. And the second thing is that you can protect yourself with deadly force if someone's trying to kill you. I think those two important things, I'll recommend that they get a firearm. I'll go one step past where you left it. You're strongly recommending it. I am sincerely endorsing it because it's an option we all hope we never have to use, obviously. And I told my wife, I told the gun shop, I told the shooting ranges I've been to, I said, I want a reliable gun because I never intend to use this. But if I ever have to, I need it to function.
Right.
So I got a Smith & Wesson. Things are fine. I'm not being endorsed or paid by them yet. So anyway, what's the third thing that you would recommend people? First, you said gold and silver. Seriously, take a look at it. See if it makes sense to put a little bit in. It's a hedge against inflation because you can't photocopy it. Number two, you said consider getting a firearm because, maybe when things are killing things and it takes almost 2 hours for someone to help, when seconds count, police are only minutes away. So there's that component. What's the third thing?
Third thing I'd have to say, it would just be educate yourself. I would challenge, any listener out there who's on the fence a little bit or who kind of thinks this is kind of stuff that's on the lunatic fringe. There's a lot of conspiracy theory stuff that take the craziest story that you've heard anyone mention in the alternative media, the craziest story, and just read about it. Look at the research. Look at the news that's out there behind it. And you know what? If you're not convinced that, hey, maybe there is something to some of these pieces of news when you hear about these kids in Bridgeport, South Chicago, getting arrested for having beer brewing equipment, and being charged with terrorism, maybe there is something to it. You know what? It's really happening. So a lot of these crazy stories that just seem so over the top, take a second, read about them, learn about them a little bit. Don't just don't just take what Katie Couric's telling you as gospel. Don't listen to Anderson Cooper and think this guy's telling you, everything straight. Do your own reading, do your own research, and better understand the news and simply educate yourself. Particularly when you mentioned earlier, the shortened explanation on inflation. Things like, simple economic principles that are generally taken for granted in today's world. When you think about the concept of fractional reserve banking, and I used the word trajectory earlier, it doesn't take a rocket science to understand that, the central banking system, it's not one that's considered sustainable.
Well, what you were saying there about educating yourself, one of the people that put something out online recently was a guy who goes by Willy BB33. We're going to see if we can bring him in right here as we wrap up our program. Got to love the Skype.
Oh, is that what that is? The Skype?
Yeah, this is the submarine.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Oh, it's rocking over here.
Yeah.
All right, have we connected here? Is this Willie?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Willie. You are a little loud. If you could back up just a scotch and turn down the playback in the background. Try this again. How are you doing, Willie?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Living the dream. Ben, you're still there, buddy.
Still here, Willie. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, my friend.
Oh, glad to meet you, too.
Hey, Willie, to tell everybody how we connected earlier today and join the conversation for a minute.
Basically, we connected through Twitter. Apparently, you read one of my tweets that you retweeted, and we went from there.
And so, do you recall which that tweet was about? I think this may have been.
Yes, it was a Ron Paul ad.
And tell us, sum up the Ron Paul ad, because you're talking with Ben Weinbrower with Existential Radio. We're here on the NewAmericanMedia.com, and kind of sum it up, because I don't know that Ben's had a chance to see it yet. What's going on in there, and why do you think it's important for people to pay attention to this 2012 election?
Well, I feel that somehow, for some reason, America is asleep. And the ad basically points out some views of Dr. Paul that, from my understanding and from my research, that he has been very consistent on his message. And I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't have given Dr. Paul the time of day 12 years ago, nor 4 years ago. But this last election kind of woke me up, and recently with the passing of the NDAA bill, that really woke me up. And so I did some research on Dr. Paul, and I find that he has been saying what I've been feeling, only he's been saying it longer. And at this point, I just really feel America's asleep. They're too into their own personal, their own personal likes, and therefore are just believing in the mainstream media or cable news too much, and aren't doing the research.
Well, you raise a good point. You said you're doing the research. Ben, address that. I don't know if Willie had a chance to hear what we were saying, but the third thing you said is research. Talk about the research angle of it, and talk directly with Willie.
Well, yeah, no, Willie, again, it's a pleasure to connect with you over the airways like this. But something you just said there and keyed in on, which was, 12 years ago, 4 years ago, not necessarily endorsing some of the ideas that Paul was putting out there. I think that's just, there's so many people, whether it be this election or last election, certainly this election is a better example, but more and more people, and there's so much more momentum to this than I think we're getting credit for from the standpoint of the mainstream media. Again, I don't think, you can look at the Obama campaign in 2008, and certainly probably one of the first times in history you saw the capability of social media to integrate with the political campaign and kind of go viral, so to speak. The Ron Paul campaign at that times 10, and obviously we've kind of been fighting the uphill battle against the media, but man, that's just so cool to hear that, just in the last few years, you've kind of gotten used to some of these ideas and felt some of these are, your own voice, which I think is really cool. But in terms of reading, doing the research and just reading what's out there, it's just, I think for most people, just open their minds beyond what they're seeing in the cable news networks or the cable news cycle, as you put it, Willie. I think that's really one of the first steps. There's alternative media sources out there that are just as legitimate, if not in many ways far more legitimate than the mainstream news sources that most people expose themselves to. So I think it's important just to get out there and get some different perspective.
Yes, very true.
We're talking live with, I guess we'll call you Willie BB33. That's where they can find you on Twitter. And we're talking with Ben of Existential.com. Willie, it's been a really interesting political season, and it looks like a lot of people are saying it's a Romney versus Obama presidency. What do you say to people that say it's all sorted out? These are our two choices. Here we go. This is all we get to do here. Because I can tell from glancing at your tweets, you're very outspoken when it comes. Well, let's just say a lot of things. But you're backing a different candidate that's not named Romney or Obama.
Well, what I have to say to the American people is that stop believing that you have to choose the lesser of two evils. There's always a third choice. And in this case, it's definitely Dr. Ron Paul. Whether you pick Obama or you pick Romney, you're still going to pick big government, big spending, and you're going to pick people who basically will help those that help them. And those that are helping them are big business, military complex. And as much as people hate to deny this, part of maybe the new world order that's coming into play. So again, take the time, do the research, give Dr. Paul a chance. And what I mean by that is really listen to him. Don't just act like what he has to say is nonsense. You might not believe in his foreign policy, but personally, I'm not afraid of Iran. I'm more afraid of our own government in the sense that I was in the military, and my goal was to fight terrorism, whether it's abroad or domestic. And right now, I'm more in fear of the domestic terrorism than I am of foreign terrorism.
Willie, it's chilling that you say something like that. First off, thank you for your service. I do appreciate it, and we've interviewed people from Oath Keepers before. Have you connected with Oath Keepers yet?
No, I haven't. I've seen their tweets, but I have not personally connected with them.
All right, but let me recommend as highly as I strongly can that you look up Oath Keepers, and I believe they're at oathkeepers.org. Yeah, oathkeepers.org. I keep it right next to me. And let me just say this. If you haven't connected with them yet, I just want to tell you really quick here. I'll go through this as quick as I can. This Oath Keepers document here, this little card, this business card, it says this: 10 unlawful orders we will not obey. Okay? It says, we will not obey orders to disarm the American people, number 1. Number 2, we will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people. Number 3, we will not obey orders to detain American people as unlawful enemy combatants or to subject them to military tribunal. Number 4, we will not obey orders to impose martial law or a quote-unquote state of emergency on a state. Number 5, we will not obey orders to invade and subjugate any state that asserts its sovereignty. Number 6, we will not obey any order to blockade American cities, thus turning them into giant concentration camps. Number 7, we will not obey any order to force American people into any form of detention camps under any pretext. Number 8, we will not obey orders to assist or support the use of any foreign troops on U.S. soil against the American people to quote-unquote keep the peace or to maintain control. Number 9, we will not obey any orders to confiscate the property of the American people, including food or other essential supplies. And number 10, from the Oath Keepers, I feel like I'm David Letterman, hey, we will not obey any orders which infringe on the right of the people to free speech, to peaceably assemble, and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. And I brought this up, and I wanted to tell you, because number 1, you've got to reach out and connect with the Oath Keepers right now. Find your local branch over in Arizona. And you got to connect with them, because this is a group of people that remembers your goal is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. This has nothing to do with politicians coming up with some nonsense. And I had a previous guest on our radio show say, well, you know, they're passing these laws that are infringing upon the Constitution. I said, you know, so they're taking our rights. And my guest said, no, they can't take your rights. You know, they're lying, and they're trying to subvert the Constitution, but your rights come from God. You know, and this is something no politician grants you because they're benevolent and you got to worship them. This is something that wherever we came from, however you choose to define this experience as a human on this earth in 2012, wherever we came from, these rights came from somewhere else, and no politician can take them away. In fact, those politicians become criminals if they're trying to enslave us. So it gets really interesting if you stand up the way that you need to, and we've liked a lot of what the Oath Keepers have had to say, so we surely recommend that you reach out to them, Willie, over in, I think you're somewhere in Arizona, right?
That is correct.
Perfect. Well, I'll tell you what, Willie, thank you so much for your time, and we've already deputized Ben to be our Illinois correspondent for anything out of the ordinary in Illinois. We deputized Dan of P.A.N.D.A, People Against National Defense Act. You can check it out. We'll post this on our YouTube site, Willie. You can check out the whole show later. But we're wondering if maybe you would be interested in being deputized as an Arizona correspondent for the New American Media. Help us keep an eye on anything local that's getting out of hand for you over there.
I'd be honored.
Perfect. Any last words for everybody, Willie? Thank you for your time.
I would like to say, since you already deputized me, I would like the American people out there to keep an eye on our little city called Quartzsite. There is some good, well-known corruption going there now.
Okay, tell us real quick what's going on in Quartzsite. I've driven through there.
Well, basically, from what I've been reading and listening to the video, it looks like the local police there have pretty well taken over the city, in the sense that you know, if you do anything, or if you don't do what they say, or you don't listen to what they say, you could get incarcerated.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Keep a close eye on that. Report it back. And thank you very much for joining us today. Like I said, we're going to post all of this on thenewamericanmedia.com. You click on the TNAM radio link, and you can find all of our archived radio shows there, or you can go to youtube.com/thenewamericanmedia. Willie BB33, thank you very much for joining us. Go find him on Twitter if you enjoyed his perspective. We are back with Ben. Ben, it's been an interesting show. We don't normally do these on Mondays, but it just seemed like this is what a military police state looks like. It's in your backyard in Chicago. Just do me a favor, continue painting the picture. What does it feel like? What does it look like? What's your gut telling you? What's the local coverage like? What are your neighbors saying? We have this tendency to go, oh, well, that's Chicago. That's not us. That's Washington. That's not us. Or that's... bring it back home to us. Paint us the picture of what it feels like and what you're seeing, because I want to know, number one, why do people oppose NATO, and what does it feel like?
Well, let me say one thing just regarding something Willie keyed in on before I get into that, because he said something very important when he talked about third-party candidates and kind of looking beyond the right-left paradigm that we get kind of jammed on our throats. But there's an organization out there called AmericansElect.org. It's a website. Check it out. It's actually, especially this point in the year, now that most of the primaries are done, it's kind of a national primary almost. So it's a real interesting thing that they're doing over there regarding third-party candidates, and to trying to inject another candidate into the debate and into the just kind of public discourse. So check that out if you're someone that's interested in the Ron Paul campaign and potentially kind of changing the way we look at elections from a right-left standpoint.
Now, isn't Buddy Roemer affiliated with Americans Elect?
He is. As a matter of fact, I think he's actually done very well, I think, with AmericansElect.org. I'm sure he's had a hell of a following. I know you've had connected with Buddy a few times on your show.
Yeah, it's been a few months, but maybe we've been talking with his campaign to bring him back on. Things get so busy, you kind of, he's doing his thing, we're doing ours. But yeah, we should probably reconnect with that. But that's a good point to kind of consider alternate places to vote, because if you're fed up with right, left, Republican, Democrat, there are other options. There are protest votes, and all you got to do is pull 15%, 18% from Republicans and Democrats, and you win the election in a three-way race. That's not impossible to do. But anyway, pick it up from there, because I think I posed a couple of questions to you.
Yeah, no, just in terms of what the look and feel is here. I mean, for the most part, things have, as it stands right now, here we are on this Monday evening, 7:10 Central Time here in Chicago, things are pretty much wound down. And I actually saw a tweet earlier with an image of President Obama actually in Soldier Field throwing a football. So I think they've kind of wound things down and are starting to get some of these guys out of town. So I'm sure there'll be some rolling street closures tonight to get these guys out to the airport and out of town. But just... I kind of painted some of the pictures earlier in terms of what I saw on the beach and certainly what we saw via streaming media and things like that. A couple stories, though, to follow up on, and your listeners out there to, Google these things, read about them. I shouldn't say Google, because we talked about Google 1,000 times.
We use Startpage. We go to startpage.com.
There you go. So go to Startpage and check out some of these articles out there. But certainly read about the kids from Bridgeport that were arrested, and 3 of which are still detained. It was 9 kids arrested, 3 of which are still detained right now. And the National Lawyers Guild has actually put out some great YouTube footage regarding that story that's still breaking. Also, there was this interesting story, Brian. We didn't have a chance to talk about this earlier, but I thought I'd point it out. Apparently, there was multiple individuals who were part of the NATO summit. So these are some world leaders. It was not identified who, but I think they said it was multiple, a minimum of 7 people who wound up with food poisoning-like symptoms, flu-like symptoms that needed medical attention. Yeah, it was an article that I caught today. Google this. Or I'm sorry, use the Start page. Go ahead and search for this. But it was a story that broke today. I thought it was really interesting. It was a local Chicago news station that broke the story. So I thought that was something that was kind of interesting. Might deserve a little bit closer review. But certainly the Bridgeport, quote-unquote, terrorist will be an interesting story to see how that develops. But and then when, just for the listeners, one last thing, when you think about all of these security measures and all of the inconvenience that the city of Chicago has had imposed upon it for this NATO summit, and think about NATO, folks, and think about what NATO means and who they are and why they're there, what this organization even does.
Explain it. Get into it right here for a sec. Go ahead.
Well, just, you think about it's the North American Trade Organization, essentially, and it's essentially an alliance that was formed in the 80s to kind of hedge against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So after this Cold War dissipated and the former Soviet Union dissolved, it really kind of became a little bit irrelevant in some sense. So it's a wonder that you still see these massive efforts that go behind these summits and these meetings, and they get so much attention. And you really think about it, does it really still make sense in today's world of geopolitics? I don't know. I guess that's something for everyone to think about. But it's a wonder that it still is such a exclusive and influential group. It's really a wonder to try to get your mind around that.
Well, the smart money is on having local elected officials who, if you're displeased with their performance, you can vote them out of office quickly as soon as their term is up. When you start going to national, and just look at America. If you want to change something in Chicago or Los Angeles or in Arizona or in Ohio or Pennsylvania, you contact your local constable, as Dan was saying with P.A.N.D.A.
Right.
Or you contact your sheriff, or you go to your mayor, you go to your congressperson, and you vote them out if they're deadbeats. But when you start going out of your state, you can't really get to, your congressmen are tougher to get to than your mayor. It's just it's a different process. And then if you do anything with NATO or any sort of global governance, these are people that don't represent you. Why would you even consider turning over your freedom and liberty to someone that doesn't have your best interest in mind? And that's what they're going through. And to bring it back to sports here, because Ben and I often talk Cleveland sports. We're long-suffering Cleveland sports fans, Cavs, Indians, Browns, and Buckeyes. Buckeyes a little bit of love, but not enough, because it's always a scandal as soon as you're happy. But you look at what people are saying, like Jonathan Vilma, and they're like, oh, well, it's defamation, and they haven't produced their evidence. Well, in your own collective bargaining agreement, you made Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, the judge, jury, and executioner of all of your ability to earn money. You signed away your right to take care of yourself. So you're kind of getting what you deserve by losing that sovereignty to be in charge of your own life. And I think that's kind of what global governance, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, versus the UN or a large, overwhelming federal government, it does the same thing. You lose your individual power to affect change on your local level because you've signed it off. Better yet, a bought and sold politician sold it off, and then you're stuck dealing with the repercussion of it. Any thoughts there?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's no as you pointed out. I mean, there's no accountability to the United States citizen, a global organization like NATO. So, it's a great point to make that point. But, I think it's something for people to think about and just understand the organization and significance. But, I think the other thing I leave people with, as you're wrapping up the show, what? Talk to people. I think one of the best things that people can do, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, we talked about just being on the airwaves and kind of starting these types of podcasts and shows, is just talk to people. Talk to people about the news. Don't be afraid to engage in, political discussion with people. Just because you may not see eye to eye doesn't mean you need to hate each other or begin some kind of heated argument. Talk to people. Ask them what they think about the news. Like, for instance, this Obama story, we didn't really touch on it, but it continues to linger. It continues to pop up. It sounds a little sensational, but hey, you know what? Even just water cooler talk. Take the pulse of people. Understand what people think and feel, and don't be afraid to interject some of these other points of view into the discussion, because as you vet these opinions and as you vet this information, you start to realize there's some validity to it. Man, now all of a sudden you're really getting somewhere.
That's a good point, Ben. Ben, we are about out of time here on the program. Tell everybody one last time who you are, how they can connect with you outside of here to check out your radio show, good sir.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, Brian. You can find us at www.existential.com. It's EXIS10TIAL. We're at the same handle, which is at Existential. Of course, you can find us also on Twitter at Existential Radio. We stream live from Windy City here every Friday night, 8 p.m. Central. So we do our show right after Brian's. We'd love to have you guys tune in, and we take live calls, live tweets. We talk about fighting for liberty, just like you, Brian.
Very nice. Well, hey, thanks a lot, man. Keep an eye on Chicago. Hope things calm back down there. But remember what it felt like with the helicopters and all the streets being blocked off and all those quote-unquote police figures with covered-up badge numbers, as I was watching on Ustream.com, where people had their badges covered up. It's like, who are these people? Where did they come from, and who are they working for? And let's keep a close eye on that, especially as Russian troops are training in a joint military exercise with U.S. troops over in Colorado. Oh, what about now? So let's keep an eye on all this stuff, because if we don't protect our freedom and liberty, our kids they're going to have a right to be really upset with us. So Ben, keep up the good work. Thanks for joining us today, and keep an eye on Chicago for us, buddy.
Appreciate it, brother. Let's connect on Friday, Brian.
All right, will do. That was Ben of existential.com. Seriously, it's almost too much to get into. There are almost too many issues on a daily basis to keep track of. What are you going to do? You could either give up. I mean, that's fine. I mean, regardless of whether LeBron James wins a championship with the Heat now, he gave up on Cleveland. Yeah, I'm mixing metaphors, I'm changing subjects, but you gotta just keep pushing forward. I mean, my parents fought for things, my grandparents fought for things, my great-grandparents. I mean, we're here, and this is a great experience in 2012. I don't know what December 21st is necessarily going to bring. But this scam, this erosion of civil liberties has got to stop. And that's why we do what we do here at thenewamericanmedia.com every single week. This was a special version on this Monday, May 21st, 2012. I want to thank Ben Weinbrough of existential.com, EXIS, the number 10, TIAL.com. I want to thank Dan Johnson, founder of P.A.N.D.A, People Against National Defense Act. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our callers. I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank everybody who checks this stuff out on YouTube and on thenewamericanmedia.com's website. We wouldn't do this without you. Thank you for your time. We'll be back on Friday to do more of the same. My name's Brian Engelman. Thank you for your time.